the organ classes while we're here. And I would love to just go around the room, since I'll probably see a lot of you throughout the week, and find out your name, where you live, and what you do, where you serve. So why don't we start right over here?
All right, I'm Sharon Rattray. I'm from Columbia, South Carolina. This is at St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church.
Okay. Do you know Jared Johnson at
Yes,
the
I
Cathedral?
do.
Yeah. Jared and I were in school together at Yale at the same time. All right. Tell me your first name again.
Sharon.
Sharon. All right. Glad you're here, Sharon.
I'm Bruce. I'm from Orchard Lake Church in West Bloomfield, Michigan.
Okay.
And I'm the music director, choral director, substitute organist for the church.
Okay. All right.
Retired after 35 years of high school choral.
Okay. Yes.
I'm frightens, and I'm from Sulphur Springs, Texas, which is 80 miles east of Dallas. And I'm an organist at First Methodist, also keyboard player,
Okay.
and also teach music at school and have piano students.
Good to have you here, Jan.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm Jean Roll from Shreveport, Louisiana, the organist at Rockland Presbyterian Church.
Yeah. Welcome.
I'm Tyler Robertson. I'm from Columbus, Ohio. I graduated here in 04 and 08 studying Joyce Jones, and I am about to start a new position at St. Mark's Episcopal in Columbus as the organist.
All right. Yes.
I'm Billy Adams from Snyder, Texas, little town out in West Texas. I'm organist at Colonial.
All right.
Learn Cartier.
Yeah.
I'm Al Trice from Fort Worth, and I'm organist at Broadway Baptist at Fort Worth.
And Al will be teaching the rest of
I'm Sherry Upshaw, and I'm the Associate Minister of Music and Organist at First Baptist Huntsville, Alabama.
Good to have you here.
I'm Phyllis McMillan, and I'm the organist at First Baptist in Marlin, which is between here and College Station.
Okay.
So,
Terrific.
Jacob Silva, and I am the organist at Holy Family Catholic Church in Wharton, Texas.
And where?
Wharton, Texas.
All right. Glad you're here.
Hi, I'm Troy Kim. I'm still on the graduation visit. Nice to meet you.
All right. Glad you're here. And you're an organist?
Yes.
Do you play in a church right now?
I will start from August.
Okay.
Yeah. At Presbyterian Church at Huntsville.
Okay. Terrific.
Oh, I'm Andy Rose. I'm a student here at Baylor as well. I don't have a church currently, but I've played services before. So.
And as an organist?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Terrific. Well, welcome. Glad you all are here. So this may be a sacrilegious title for a Baptist college to call this. I probably should have renamed it. But with that idea, it is scriptural that there's something wonderful about having new life breathed into the tunes that we know and love by having different context and that uniqueness of our interpretation that can change over time and depending on what the needs are in the worship service at the time. So I also say planned improvisations in worship because a lot of people get very scared when they hear the word improvisation. At least I do. Because I am not one of those geniuses that can sit down and improvise a four-voice fugue, on the spot. Al Travis is, but not very well. But the thing is, I think most great improvisers actually do a lot of practicing improvising. We spend time really planning out so that in the moment, what may sound totally spontaneous is partly spontaneous, but partly structured with a kind of architecture. So for me, the great thing is finding that bag of tricks that I can use then with lots of different tunes to set up the music in a way that is going to engage the congregation to sing or is going to provide just the right kind of interlude or modulation from one mood to another or one liturgical element to another in the service. So to keep you from being scared by the word improvisation, improvisation is the purpose of this course, because we all can do things to breathe new life into the music. So the primary responsibility of all that we do as church musicians is to engage people to worship God. We've all been in performances, whether they're outside of worship or in worship, that have been hair-raising in the sense that they totally gripped us. And we've all been in places where we might have nodded off at a time or two. And that can happen with music, that can happen with spoken word. It all is about engaging people. And so, to me, improvisation is one of the best ways to do that, because it's not just the 4 parts that are printed on the page. It's something new and different. It's new and different every time you play it. I think it's always good to remember really basic good habits in terms of how we lead congregational song. The first is to remember that it is first and foremost vocal music, even though on the page we see these 4 parts, and so we as keyboardists have that tactile feel of knowing right hand, left hand, remembering that it's all aligned, that it all is linear, and so it has to be sung with breath. How many of you would consider yourselves good singers? How many of you would consider yourselves kind of okay singers, but wouldn't want to sing in public? Yeah. How many of you would say, I'm not a singer at all? Okay. And so, the further you go on that spectrum, the more important it is that you actually spend a little time, maybe when the doors are locked, when you're practicing, and sing a little bit. Sing with yourself, maybe sing before you even start playing, so that you remind yourself of how this is vocal music. And that will help you establish a tempo, that will help you get the feel of breathing. We can internalize so much better what the congregation is going to need from us if we do that. I think tempo, you have to look for the big beat in the music. And by that, I mean, if we're in 4/4, likely it's going to be the half note that gets the big beat. If we're in 3/4, it's likely going to be in 1. And so, that doesn't mean all of the hymns have to be fast, but if we're doing, for example, Hosanna, Loud Hosanna, if it's that will have a different feel than the second one of those. If we're feeling 4 beats per bar, feels very vertical, very much like an organist might be tempted to play it. Whereas if you feel it in the big beat, then it flows. Be thou my vision. So think of that big beat. That will give you a tempo that is healthy and comfortable to sing to get all the way through the line. It'll also help you as you get to the ends of the verses. There's always that feeling of, what do I do when I get to the end of the verse? Let's see. So if you think of that big beat going, so you always keep that going. If it's Hosanna, Loud Hosanna. Big beat going all the way through from beginning to end. Then I think what gets interesting is when you start asking questions about the Spirit. And that, for me, is really the point at which I open the doors of worship in my preparation. I spend a lot of time when I'm getting hymns ready for Sunday, reading the text. And this is sitting there without playing any notes. Reading the text figuring out are there patterns, what is the hymn about? Only by doing that will you get a sense then of how you want to play the hymn and what kind of improvisation you might do. So I say spend time reading the text, finding out what each verse is saying. And then beyond that, then you will engage the congregation with all of the things that we're going to talk about, how you introduce the hymn, what registration you use, and style. Maximize the use of the instrument, using as much color as possible, and we'll talk a lot more about that in one of the later sessions about the organist palette. And then the dynamic range of the instrument. On hymns, especially when you think about introductions, we don't have to have everything be mezzo forte and loud. You can have all sorts of different dynamics. You can play quite a soft introduction for a hymn that may be, mezzo forte when they come in. So that's kind of the basic information and basic good habits that we want to remember. Then I think getting into some of these techniques of improvisation, we'll focus mainly in this first segment on introductions and some things that you can do as you introduce the hymn. And we can talk a little bit later about what you might do then once the congregation is singing. Probably my favorite beginner's tool of improvisation is the pedal point, because it's the easiest. So you have two choices usually in pedal points. You have the tonic, which is the main note of the key you're in, and you have the dominant, which is the fifth. So if we're doing Hosanna La Hosanna, I might plop my foot down on a low E flat. Turn to number 1/3 in your tune. So I might choose the dominant for this one. So very simple, you can do that really in any key, in almost any hymn. Let's take, "Oh God, Our Help in Ages Past." So we all can do that. We all can put a foot down, so to speak. One of the more interesting ones, though, is when you have the pedal point not in the pedal, but somewhere else. Turn back to number 117. This is one of my favorite little tricks, but it inevitably makes people think there's something wrong with the chord. So, as with gladness, men of old did that guiding star to hold. As with joy they hailed its light, leading onward, beaming bright. So you might do something like this. That's what we were singing about. This is about the wise men following the star to find the Christ child. So the way you do this is you put the, can anyone tell me, was that the tonic or the dominant? It was too high to hear. That was the dominant. So if I was playing, in the hymnal it's in A flat. I was playing it in G. So I put the pencil on the D, which is the dominant in the key of G. And all I had was a 4-foot flute drum. And the box closed so it wasn't too piercingly loud. And then I just had strings up here, and I played all first inversion chords with the melody on top. Everyone knows what first inversion is. And then gradually add pedal on the second line, and then maybe add a solo out of the melody on the third line. And then you set your next piston so that star is still floating, but you have a fuller sound so that the congregation will be supported when they come in. And then you just play with the right hand and pull the pencil out with the left, or have one of the choir members come over and pull that out. So that's a cute little idea that you could use if you want to paint a picture of the star. You can do the same thing with hymn number 85, the first Noel. This one you could use a tonic pedal point. So we're in the key of D here. I wouldn't use this trick twice on the same song. Ostinato is the next one. Who can tell me what is an ostinato?
A repeated pattern.
A repeated pattern, exactly. So it could be something like, just a repeated pattern, or sometimes in the pedal we'll have. Ostinatos is really just about anything. Pedal ostinatos can be really simple, so I could also put one, I could do an ostinato like this. And then you notice what I did there at the end. Had this kind of string of the last two bars of the music there. So that kind of wraps it out with a nice coda. A little bit of a retard, and then they're ready to come in. Let's look at number 406. My hope is built. One of our former ministers was not a musician, but he knew what he liked and what he really didn't like. And he always would say things about how he liked peppy music. He didn't like draggy music. He liked marching music, but not sad music. So he loved the solid rock, and one of the things that I knew would always really light him up is if I started with this kind of ostinato. So just taking that open fifth, which is F, C, and F, and here I've just drawn 16 and 8 foot reeds, so it has that real growly sound. Why do you think I would choose that for this hymn? What am I trying, what picture am I trying to create? Why would I have?
A firm foundation.
Yeah, exactly. And I might do the same kind of thing if we were singing How Firm a Foundation I might do. But that same idea of having just a lot of really firm, strong sound. If I had other 16 and 8 foot flues, I might put them with that so that you get this really strong sound, but that also can establish the rhythm of that. So. And then you could play all the way through the verse, through that hymn, using that. You could give the ostinato a break when we get to the third line, and you could play. How many of you know that the Methodist hymn, A Charge to Keep I Have, A Calling to Pursue? That's another one. The melody is Charge to Keep. So you can move that that ostinato of perfect fifths around to fit the harmonies. You can have a tonic, subdominant, dominant, 1, 4, 5 chords. So it doesn't have to stay in the same place. It could be a rhythmic ostinato in that respect. Turn to number 130. Hosanna la Hosanna. You can make your ostinato as simple or as virtuosic as you want. So far we've done some rhythmic ostinatos. This one, I was looking at this text one time and I thought, what kind of ostinato would capture the energy that was present on Palm Sunday? You know, the crowd is gathered. And I started looking at the first 5 notes of the piece. And I thought, so I'm just taking those first 4 notes and repeating them over and over as 16th notes, 4 16th notes. You have to do a little bit of practicing. I didn't just do that on the spot. You have to do a little practice to get that flowing nicely. And then the best thing about that is you may do that little figuration. You may think, oh, my arm's starting to get a little bit tired. So you only do it for the first 2 lines, and then you take a break and play 4-part harmony, and then you come back to it to play the last line. It's your improvisation. You can do with it what you want. Now, canon. Who knows what a canon is? A musical canon, not the heavy articulation. Musical canon, what is that? And canon in D is not actually a canon. So a canon is where there's a leader and a follower. So turn to number 330. One of our most well-known and beloved. Canons are wonderful because they can be very simple and very transparent. And they're also a good mental exercise for you. I always have to spend a little time working out the canon. I pretty much have never thought, oh, I'll do a canon on this, and just done it in worship. I like to spend a little time doing that because it takes a little bit to get both hands doing exactly what they're supposed to do. But pentatonic hymns are great ones for canons. Pentatonic means, the way we usually think of it, the scale of 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. It's great wind chime music. So Amazing Grace is one of those. Lots of hymns that are folk, have folk basis, are pentatonic. They make great canons because all of those notes will sound good with any of the other notes in that. But you don't have to limit yourself to that. Try canons with different hymns. You might find out that you like one of those. You can always put a pedal or an ostinato with a canon. So with Amazing Grace, I can do. Now you notice at the end of the first line, the canon got a little off. My left hand did something different. But, and I would love to tell you that that was planned intentionally, but it's a good example of what may happen when you're in the heat of the moment. So you can always, if you make a mistake, Jerry Hancock used to say, make it again and then make it a third time, and everyone would think that that's what you meant to do. So canons are a great opportunity to experiment with that. And that's the important thing. If the follower gets lost along the way, it's no reason to, freak out and get worried because it's your improvisation. So you can keep going. You can just let that follower become a pedal point. Maybe if your left foot is on the tonic, then suddenly your follower could decide to even out until you get to the end of that. This next one is not in this hymnal, but how many of you know the tune? How many of your congregations sing that? I'm always curious about this. Yeah, most of our congregation doesn't know that, but it's such a great tune. And if you want to see an exercise in canons, look at or listen to Marcel Dupre's Variations on the Noel, because he has canons at all different intervals. It's really very fascinating. But this tune I really like, and I think makes great opportunity for canon. So you could start with just this plaintive pedal point. and a little sustaining. Let's turn to number 294. You know, as I did with the Hosanna Loud, Hosanna intro, a lot of times it's nice to find inspiration for your improvisation in a very small little chunk of notes. And the opening motive of a hymn is a great place to begin. So, Have Thine Own Way, Lord, is a good one. I went through a period of time where I couldn't think of anything creative to do with this hymn because, you know, everyone knows it, everyone loves it. It's, you have to, the challenge is find a tempo that is going to help us get out before 12:30 so that we can beat the Baptists or the Methodists or the Lutherans and Luthies. So I like to think of this, thinking of that opening motive. Is helpful. Turn to number 27, All Creatures of Our God and King. This one is great fun using the circle of fifths. So, you know, the circle of fifths we have, if we're in the key of D, let's do this in the key of D. So then you have A is the next in the circle up, and then the next up from there is E. So you could do something like this, where I'll take the opening motive of 7 or 8 notes and stack it up in perfect fifths. So. In the rest of the hymn. And once I get to that, so I'll do that one more time so that you can see what I did. You might start with the melody only in the pedal.
But you did each of the successive fifths in minor mode, which makes them less jarring.
That's true, yeah. So that's a really great point. I stayed in the key of D major so that when I'm playing the D chord, I have D major. And then if I go up to A and build a triad on top of that in the key, it's A major. But then when I get to E, it's E minor, exactly as it would be, just staying exactly within the D major scale. And then the B minor, and then F sharp minor, and then I just sneak to the dominant. So a great point. Thank you for noticing that. Yeah. I could, it would be a little wild if I went, yeah. And then, and then suddenly I end up kind of far afield. But you can make that work. You can make any combination of those work. And again, I didn't just come up with that. You know, I spent a little while working that out. And you might play that opening couple notes and see where it leads and then say, how might I repeat this? You could, this is not exactly the same idea, but it's a kind of a similar treatment. You could start on D. That combination might work. If you plan for yourself a little stopping point, say, okay, I want to end up on the dominant so that then I can jump to the last three measures of the hymn and close out this introduction, then you can give yourself that stopping point. So now looking at O God, Help in Ages Past, this would be one that's a little bit more complicated, a little more complex in terms of the treatment, but not too difficult. You could take those first five notes, or first four notes, and then you could play that left hand, right hand in increasingly fast values. So this would be like half notes, and then quarter notes, and then eighth notes. Then you could just repeat that. I've got something a little more colorful that I do with this that I can show you in a second. But the idea being, you can take it in Ornamentation, where you have long note lengths, then slightly shorter, and then you kind of are making a little ostinato out of it by playing it in 8 notes or 16th notes. So you can take that idea, and then you can lay it over different harmonic changes. So let me show you what I mean. Flat chord with the C in it, so it's an add 9 or add 2. So if A flat, it's an A flat 7 chord, so A flat pedal. Now, you can make it as simple or as complicated, as involved as you want, but taking just that little opening motive and doing something, something unique and creative with it. Does anyone have any questions so far? I've been doing a lot of talking. Any questions or ideas, any particular hymns that you think would make a great canon or a great rule?
You mentioned how far foundation earlier.
Yeah.
Would you do some, I'm asking.
You know what, I always think with that hymn, and I can't remember if I was going to talk about this in a little bit, but I, of course, always think pedal point. More than ostinato, I think this one is like laying the foundation there first. And then I actually think that canons can work really well with this. So I might do something like, something like that. Now, there are lots of other variations you could do on that. You can also, if you play a fairly small instrument, one that doesn't, or even medium sized, but you don't have a 32-foot stop and you want to create one, you could play an open fifth in the pedal, which gives that resultant effect, which can give you even more of a feeling of strong foundational bass. You could do it on a dominant, so instead of G and D, you're playing D and A. And I would say just stay on the pedal point until you can't stand it. And then you can get off of that. A lot of times by about the third line of the hymn, you can get off of it. But I think that that's a great one to kind of portray that text. I do a similar kind of thing on the Church's One Foundation. You could start off. Sorry. Introductions don't have to be long. In fact, a lot of times it can be better, especially if it's after the sermon, you're looking at the watch, or it's 10 after noon. Making it something short, start with a pedal point, have that little opening motive in there, maybe repeat that opening motive at a couple of different pitch levels. Sitting out there will be so glad that you played a short little introduction, and probably a lot of the adults. All right, any other questions? Or any other? Yeah.
Would you do the Oh God, Our Help again?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, and please, anytime you want one more shot at hearing what I did, just shout out. So, in the key of C, I'm starting on a G in the pedal, using that G, E, A, G. Left hand, quarter notes, right hand, eights. I go to F minor. Between this E, G sharp, B, and F sharp, A. assembly with unison melody gives a really strong sense of the tune, and then you can break into parts. Let's see. Does anyone know Duke Street in the Baptist?
70 or 587.
What's that?
70?
70?
D major. 587 is in
70 is good. That was like a sword drill. Exactly. All right, so turn to number 70. We'll do it in that key to begin with. So you could start just with all unison melody. You can also break into parts a little bit sooner. And then you can get into changing harmonies and all sorts of things like that. Another good one you could do with that. All in octaves, and then land on the pedal point, and then really all I'm doing with the other parts is playing exactly what's in the hymnal. Maybe changing one accidental here or there so that I can stay in that key of C major the whole way. You can do the same thing with any of the verses of the hymn, which varies up the texture, so you're not always playing 4 parts at the same time. Just gives a slightly different texture to everything. Let's turn to number 60, and look at this beautiful Irish melody, Be Thou My Vision. You know, I love this hymn. It's just beautiful. I think there's something about the tune that always makes me think a little bit of a penny whistle, you know. So taking a 4-foot flute or a 2-foot flute and just ornamenting the melody a little bit, trying to make it sound a little Irish, like it would be played by a penny whistle. Trying to make it sound like a bird there. So you could do that kind of thing with Amazing Grace for that matter. There's this wonderful arrangement by Frederick Swan of that begins like bagpipe. and then in the right hand, just staying within that same pentatonic scale, but adding little, those nice little ornaments that bagpipers play. You can do this with nearly anything. Turn to number 16. A Worship the King. Doesn't have to be a soft hymn for you to do this with. You can do something like. So just ornamenting as you will with little turns. If you have a nice big solo reed or something like that, you can always use that. If you have a nice cornet, you can. Look at number 200. All hail the power of Jesus' name. Same kind of thing. In the Jack Jones setting that I play this point for the postlude, so you can kind of hear the outline of the melody in there. If you're watching it on the page, you might hear it a little bit. Go into that wonderful circle of fifths in the crown room section. The idea being, start out with a melody. If you have a nice, big, proclamatory solo reed, you might just play one note at a time on that, ornamenting the melody. Turn over one page to the next All Hail the Power of Jesus' name, Coronation. Okay, I have to ask, how many of your congregations sing both of these tunes? Okay, how many only sing diadem? And how many only sing this one? Most of this one. It was so interesting because I grew up knowing diadem and not coronation, and then I've heard so many other people say, "Oh, that one's too hard to sing. I can't sing all that." And I said, "Well, then you're not Baptist because it's fun." So with the coronation one, you could ornament the melody in all sorts of different ways. One of the fun things to do is to use horn fifths. Now, this is the idea of taking really only 4 notes of the scale. 1, 2, 3, 5, 1. And if you put notes together like this, using 1 and 3, and then 2 and 5, the reason it's called horn fifths is because a lot of times you'll hear horn calls. You'll hear lots of little fanfares using that kind of scale. So you can play around with this. And here we actually have horn fifths written out. Depart from it. dominant tonic opening, that leap up of a perfect fourth, is very proclamatory music, and this is one of the most proclamatory of all hymns. And so I can't help but think of trumpets and using that little horn fifths idea. And then you can kind of go off and do whatever else. But just using that idea for the